We're ready for part 2 of Loveable Lyle. Lyle is hiding in the closet because he is afraid to meet the mother of his enemy. But the lady and his mom are getting ready to get their coats out of the closet. The instant the door opened, Lyle fell out upon both women. Mrs. Prim let out a sharp gasp, and Mrs. Hipple definitely screamed. "Are you all right? Are you all right?" asked Mrs. Prim as they struggled to their feet. "Take him away! Take that monster away from me!" Mrs. Hipple began to shriek. "Oh, please, he won't hurt you. I promise he won't hurt you." Mrs. Prim tried to reassure her. "Look at him. He's more frightened than you are." "Let me out of here," Miss Hipple shrieked on. "Let me out of this terrible house." Mrs. Prim opened the door as Miss Hipple, her hair and clothes all in a rumple, stumbled from the house. "If that crocodile ever so much as crosses my path, I'll have him arrested," she called back over her shoulder. "This is supposed to be a nice neighborhood, you know." "Poor Lyle," sighed Mrs. Prim that night. "Now he's afraid he's going to be arrested. We're just going to have to think of something to take his mind off his troubles." On the first warm day, the Prims knew just what to do for Lyle. They decided to take him to the beach. "Swimming has always been Lyle's favorite sport," smiled Mrs. Prim. "And he's by far the best swimmer in the family," her husband added. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Prim made themselves comfortable, and Joshua started on a sand castle. Lyle took a running dive into the water. Lyle's water stunts delighted everyone. Everyone, that is, except Mrs. Hipple, who had just arrived and with Clover was dunking her feet. Mrs. Hipple set out at once to find the lifeguard. "Lifeguard, lifeguard," she cried. "Do you permit crocodiles to bathe here?" "Certainly not," answered the lifeguard. "Well, it might interest you to know there is a crocodile bathing out there this very minute." Mrs. Hipple pointed to the spot where she had seen the crocodile. Suddenly, everyone on the beach was looking and pointing, but not at a crocodile. They were pointing to a little girl, thrashing about helplessly in the water. "Clover, Clover," cried Mrs. Hipple. "She's drowning." The lifeguards immediately pushed off to the rescue, but Lyle raced to the scene before them. "There's a crocodile out there," someone gasped. "No, it's Lyle," called Mrs. Prim, standing nearby. "I mean, it's Lyle the crocodile." Lyle brought a very wet but happy Clover safely back to shore. "Hooray for Lyle!" the crowd shouted. "Oh, Lyle, dear friend," sobbed Mrs. Hipple. "How can I ever thank you enough?" Everyone was so proud of Lyle. He was immediately appointed honorary lifeguard. He was then given a hat, a sweatshirt, and a silver whistle. "Lyle, you are a hero," said the head lifeguard. "Feel free to come here and save people from drowning anytime you wish." The next day, a note addressed to Lyle was found under the door of the house on East 88th Street. "Oh no, not again," Mrs. Prim moaned. Dear Lyle, read Mr. Prim, I love you. I love you more than anything. I love you so much I can't stand it. And the note was signed, Your Friend for Life, Clover Sue Hipple. P.S., Mr. Prim continued, may I play with you today? P.P.S., my mother said it's all right. Lyle smiled one of his big, big smiles. I wanted to show you here at the end where it says P.S. and P.P.S. That stands for postscript and postscript. And when you're writing a letter and you sign your name, like love Mrs. K or from Mrs. K, and then you remember something you forgot to say, you can write P.S. and then say what you want to tell your friend. If you forget a second thing, you can write P.P.S. and then tell the next thing. My activity for this story is to make some connections to the story Loveable Lyle. You may have done this in school before. There are 3 main type of connections that you can make when you're reading. The first one is called text to self. So you're reading the story and it's reminding you, or you're connecting to something that has happened in your own life. And I can think about in my life when I was growing up, I was different from the other kids because I was short. And they used to call me names like Pipsqueak or French Fry or Shorty or Half Pint. So I can make that connection to the story with Lyle being different. The next connection is called text to text. And that's when you're reading something and it reminds you of something else that you've read, another story. And so when I was reading this story about Lyle at the beach, it reminded me of another story that I hope to read to you soon called Harry by the Sea. And it's about a dog who went to the beach with his family, and he had some trouble at the beach, just like they did in this story. The last kind of connection is called text to world. And that's when you read your story and it reminds you, or you make a connection to something that's happening in real life, in your world, in your community. And so right now we're having the coronavirus. That's why we're home from school and from work. And many people are feeling sad or lonely or scared. And Lyle was having those feelings too. And so my connection for text to world would be for you to practice writing a letter. And only a nice letter, no mean letters. But see if you can think of someone you could write to that could be encouraged by getting a letter. Maybe a friend or a cousin, someone in your house, a grandma. You could even write to your teacher. You could write to a neighbor. If there's a doctor or a nurse that your family knows, you could write them a note because they're working really hard right now taking care of sick people. Ask your mom and dad to help you with a letter and learn how to write a letter with the correct format where you say, Dear friend, and then you write your letter and then you write from Mrs. K at the end. And you can even practice making a PS or a PPS at the end of your letter. For the other 2 connections, text to self and text to text, why don't you grab a piece of paper and draw a picture of those connections or write some sentences about those connections. See you next time.